My son did though. He ate the whole thing like a vacuum cleaner. It was great. Good evening. Maseches Yevamos daf ayin gimel and daf ayin daled amud aleph, and we'll be stopping on the second to last line on ayin daled amud aleph, and then on Shabbos Emir Sashem we'll be picking up with ayin daled amud beis and daf ayin hey. Let's get started. We're on the top of ayin gimel amud aleph on the third line. Says the Gemara, Bo mine me Rav Sheshes. A question was asked from the base medrash to Rav Sheshes. Orel mahu b'maiser. What is the din of an orel, a person who has yet to be circumcised, in regards to his ability to eat maiser? Do we say that that just like we were able to learn the yalif Pesach mi maiser le'inyan aninus, we were able to learn something about Pesach from Meiser to Aninus. Therefore, Yalif Nami, we can learn in the reverse direction of Meiser mi Pesach le'inyan Orlos, and therefore Arelos. And then we can see, therefore, that maybe a person who is an Arel should be Aser b'Meiser. Odilma, or perhaps that we're not allowed to learn in both directions because Chamor Mikal Yalif. Yes, it's appropriate to learn Pesach mi Meiser because Pesach's more Chamor than Meiser, but Kal mi Chamor lo Yalif. But we can't learn in the reverse direction of Meiser from Pesach, and therefore maybe we'd assume that an Orel is allowed to eat Meiser. So the Gemara says 6 lines down, on ayin gimel amud aleph, Amar lahu, Rav Sheshes says back to the base medrash Tani Tuha. We've already learned this. This brisa says truma v'habikurim. These two food products of truma and bikurim, chayavan aleim misa. If one eats them inappropriately, they'd be chayav misa. V'chomesh. If they ate it by accident, they'd be required to pay a chomesh. V'asurin lezarim. That it cannot be eaten by non-kohanim. V'hein nichse kohen. They are considered the property of the kohen. V'olin be'echad umeya. When it comes to bittul, the ratio is 1 to 100. Utu'unin rechitzas yadayim, and you need to wash your hands to access them. And v'he'er of shemesh, and that if it becomes tamei, if you become tamei, you have to wait till nightfall. Harei elu b'trumu v'abikurim, ma she'ein kain b'maiser. So all of these halachos that we just learned are specific to the world of truma and bikurim, but ma she'ein kain b'maiser, they don't apply by maiser. What is not referenced here? Orla. What was our question? Is Orla shaykh by Meiser? V'imisa. If you want to say that we have a halachic status of Orel that's mutter to eat by Meiser, then it should have said in this brisa in regards to Truma and Bikurim Nisni, it should have said Orel aser bahan. An Orel is not allowed to eat the Truma and the Bikurim, and Mashe Ein Kain b'Meiser, but by Meiser they are allowed. But it doesn't say that. So therefore, maybe we should assume that you're not allowed to eat, that an Orel is not allowed to eat the Meiser. Says the Gemara, no, that's not true. Really, we can assume fairly that an Orel is not allowed to eat the Truma and the Bikurim, and ton of a shiur. Really, the brisa that we just learned, the Tani Tuha brisa that Rav Sheshes just quoted, it really had other things that could have gone in it. Ton of a shiur, the author of the brisa left out a few things. However, as a rule, when a brisa is written and things are left out, we never only leave out one thing. We have to leave out multiple things. Otherwise, we cannot use this principle of ton of a shiur. Says the Gemara, my shiur to high shiur. What else was left out in addition to the case of Orel? So 6 lines from the bottom of ayin gimel amud aleph, the Gemara says shiur de katani seifa. We can see from the end of the brisa what was left out. Yesh b'maiser u'b'bikurim. In regards to maiser and bikurim, ma'ashe'ein kain b'truma, there are things that apply to maiser and bikurim that don't apply to truma. Sha'maiser v'bikurim tunan havas makom. That when it comes to maiser and bikurim, maiser has to be in Yerushalayim, bikurim has to be brought to the Beis Hamikdash. They have havas makom. They have a very specific place where they have to be brought. And as well, u'tu'unin vidui, we have to read certain paragraphs, famously by bikurim, arami oved avi v'chulei. The asr la'onin, and an onin is not allowed to benefit from maiser and bikurim. Reb Shimon matir, and v'chayavim b'bir, Reb Shimon poter, and these foods of meiser and bikurim, they have to be burned if they become tamei. And Rav Shimon says that they're poter from burning them. Now, what's left out of this brisa? What is the Gemara giving as an example? We had already said that one thing was left out about an Orel. An Orel, we said, was omitted in regards to his accessibility to Meiser and Bikurim, to Truma and Bikurim. So says the Gemara, what else was left out? V'ilu asr levar bat mehen betuma, to say that what needed to be taught was that it's asr to burn them when they're tamei. Ve'ochlan betumas atzman loked, and if a person eats them when they're tamei, they get malchos. Mashein ken betruma. So that's lokatani, that was omitted. Alma ton of a shiur. We therefore see that really arelos is applicable by the worlds of truma and bikurim, mashe'ein kain be'maiser, and therefore it's mutter. That would be the conclusion of the Gemara right here on the top of ayin gimel amud beis. The conclusion of the Gemara is that it is mutter for an orel to eat maiser. Good. That little aleph there in the beginning of the third line on Ein Gimel Amud Beis should be Amar Mar. That's what's added here by the Hagos Habach, because we're going to analyze what we just learned. Amar Mar, ve'asurin le'onein ve'Reb Shimon matir. We had said that an onein is restricted, but Reb Shimon says it's allowed. Mina lehu. Lehu is plural. Reb Shimon is singular, which means the Tanakh Kama is the Chachamim, which is the lehu. Mina lehu. How do the Chachamim know that there's an isser for an onein in regards to these foods? Says the Gemara. And how do we understand the phrase Trumas Yadecha? And if Trumas Yadcha means Bikurim, and if Bikurim is compared to Meiser, Ma Meiser Asr La'onein, Bikurim Asr La'onein, and that's how the Chachamim got their opinion that an onein is not allowed to eat Bikurim. Fine. Says the Gemara of Reb Shimon, who argued on line 3 and says that it's mutter for an onein to benefit from these foods. How does he get around the drasha that we just read? Says the Gemara 7-8 lines down on Ein Gimel Amud Beis, Reb Shimon, Truma Karinhu Rachmana. The Torah doesn't call it Bikurim, it calls it Truma. Ma Truma muteres la'onein, not Bikurim muter la'onein, but it says nothing about Bikurim. So you cannot learn from here that an onein is restricted from Bikurim. An onein is only restricted from Truma. Another part of the brisa that we had learned on the bottom of Ein Gimel Amud Aleph, turning to the top of Ein Gimel Amud Beis, was as follows. V'chayavin bebiur. We said that in certain cases with certain foods that there's an obligation for biur, but Reb Shimon poter. What is this machlokes about? Mar makish, mar umar lo makish. One of the Tanaim does make the comparison. We don't know to what yet. And one doesn't make the comparison. Take a look at Rashi, just to our left, about 20 lines down in the Rashi's Dibur Hamaschil, Mar Makish, Tanakama, Makish Bikurim Lemaiser, Techsi Bebi Arti HaKodesh. And because we have this hekesh between Bikurim and Maiser, therefore the Tanakama says that you're chayav in bebiur. But according to Reb Shimon, who doesn't make the hekesh between bikurim and meiser, there's no way to learn that out, and therefore there is no obligation to do biur. We had also said in that brisa at the bottom of Ein Gimel Amud Aleph, asr levar mehen betuma, that it's asr to burn them when they're tamei, ve'ochlen betumas atzman loke, that if a person eats them when they are tamei, then they get malchus. Where do each of these halachos get learned from? Says the Gemara de Tanya, we have a brisa. Reb Shimon Omer lo biarti mimenu betamei, bein shani tamei v'hu tahor, bein shani tahor v'hu tamei. Either way, if I'm tamei and the product is tahor, or vice versa, it still should not be burned. V'heichan musar al achilaso. Where does the Torah warn us about eating this food? Says the Gemara, Eini Yodea. And the Gemara responds, what do you mean that you don't know? It is mafurish a pasuk in Chumash. Tumas hakuf behedjek sibe. We know that if a person is tamei, he's not allowed to eat the food. Says the Gemara, no. Tumas haguf behedjek sibe. What does the Gemara say? What does the Torah say about tumas haguf? Nefesh asher tigavo. That if you have a person who is tamei themselves and they touch the food, so we have an explicit pasuk saying that a person who is tamei is not allowed to eat this food. So therefore, what does he mean by saying Eini Yodea? That's just that's the kids in Zilberman's in Yerushalayim. They know all the psukim and Chumash. That's basic stuff. We might not know all the psukim and Chumash. I don't know all the psukim and Chumash, but this should be obvious for a Tana or an Amora. Says the Gemara, no, hachi kami baile. You missed the question. Tumas atzmo minai, the actual tomb of the food itself. How do we know that it's usher to eat that food when it's tamei? Talmud lomar, the Gemara responds, lo sucha le'echol b'sharecha ma'asar degonecha. One pasuk says that you're not allowed to eat in your gates the meiser of the grains. Ulahagnu omer b'sharecha tochlenu, in regards to chulin, the pasuk says you are allowed to eat hatamei ve'atar yachtav katzri v'chayal. That if chulin becomes tamei, you're allowed to eat them. The Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, afilu tamei v'tar ochlan al shulchan echa b'ka'ara achas ve'enon chosheshin. When it comes to food that's chulin, we allow people to eat at the same table, even if some of the food is tahor and some of the food is tamei. That's only true by chulin. But hacha, when it comes to meiser sheni that's tamei, lo seichel, you're not allowed to eat it. So that was what the Gemara was asking when it said the question of v'heichan muzhar al achilaso. So we just answered these two questions, which is, what are the mari makomos that indicate that it's usher to burn tuma? That was lo biarti mimenu b'tamei. And how do we know that there are malkos? Because we said the meiser sheni is different than chulin. Chulin can be eaten b'tuma. Meiser sheni cannot be eaten b'tuma. We had said Masha'ein kain b'truma, that there was a difference between certain halachos and truma, between meiser and bikurim and truma. And in this particular case, what the Gemara is referencing is that meiser sheni cannot be burned. Masha'ein kain b'truma, truma can be burned. We've seen this throughout Shas, that nifsal requires to be burned. So says the Gemara 2/3 of the way down. Minolan, how do we know that truma can be burned? Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Kra, Lo biarti mimenu b'tamei, mimenu yatam mavir, aval atam mavir shemen shel truma shenitma. That from this we see the drasha that one is allowed to burn truma, but they're not allowed to burn. They're not allowed to burn meiser. Maybe we should have made a different drasha. Maybe we shouldn't have said that truma is what's allowed to be burned, but maybe shemen of hektish is allowed to be burned. Says the Gemara, that doesn't work. Lav kal v'chomer Uma meiser hakal amra Torah lo biarti mimenu b'tamei. Just like meiser, which is on a lower level than the oil of hektish, the Torah said you cannot burn it. Kodesh chamor lo kol shekin. The more so the oil cannot be burnt. Says the Gemara, according to that argument, if you're saying that it's all more holy than Meiser, well, guess what else is more holy than Meiser? Truma. Ihachi, says the Gemara, Truma nami kal v'chomer. Why would Truma be allowed? Truma is also holier than Meiser, and if Meiser is not allowed, then Truma shouldn't be allowed. Says the Gemara, that is an excellent logical question, but I'm going to answer you with something that is above logic, and that is Haksiv mimenu. We have a drasha, so the drasha is what is matir, the burning of Truma. Says the Gemara, Umar Rois, why is it that you thought that Truma should be allowed for there to be included here, to be burned, but that Kodesh could not be? Says the Gemara, Mistabra Kodesh Lome Ma'itna, Shekain, as some like to jokingly call it, pancakes, which is an acronym that's found in the Gemara. Doesn't really play out that way, but it does kind of look like it a little bit. Pancakes. It does. That's what Rabbi, what's his name, do I listen to Rabbi Resnick? Okay, what does pancake stand for? That when it comes to Kodesh, we have Pigul, Nosar, Korban, Me'ila, Kares, and Be'isr Onein. A little cheap on the Samach there. That was the Samach from Isr Onein. Just saying it wasn't the best acronym. But these are all chumras by Kodesh that don't apply to other areas of halacha. So therefore, we should be more strict by Kodesh. We should have different halachos by Kodesh than we do by Truma. Says the Gemara, Adarabba, Truma lo ma'itna sheken machpaz. There are 4 things that are chamor about Truma. Says the Gemara, Misa v'chomesh ve'in la pidyon v'asur lezarim. So that the Gemara says there are chumras there as well. Answers the Gemara, Hanach Lepishin Kodesh is still holier than Truma. Or when we talk about Kodesh, we're talking about Kares. When we talk about Truma, we're not talking about Kares, so therefore the cases are totally different. Let's dig into one of the things we've already learned. 6 lines from the bottom on Ayin Gimel and Beis, the Gemara says, if a person eats the food when it's tameh, loke masha'ein kin b'truma. With certain foods, when you eat them, you get malkos, which is not true by truma. So says the Gemara, milka hu delolaki. It's true you don't get malkos for eating truma. However, ha'isura ika. And how do we know that this is true? How does this all work out that you don't get malkos? We know that malkos is a lav sheyesh bo ma'aseh. You do a lav sheyesh bo ma'aseh, you're done. Okay, there's other types of lavin, but in this case, a lav shein bo ma'aseh, you should be chayiv. So why don't you get malkos? Says the Gemara, Minalan, how do we know that this is true, that there's an isser without malkos? Because Amar Kra, bish'arecha tochlanu, lazeh v'lo la'acher. In your camps, you are allowed to eat this. This is referring to chulin, that's tameh, that you're allowed to eat, but v'lo la'acher. V'lav haba mechlal aseh. And when a person eats truma that's tameh, they're really violating an isser aseh, not an isser lav. Because the only way we know that the truma is going to be prohibited to eat is from an inference of bish'arecha tochlanu. From chulin, that's tameh, you're allowed to eat. What does that imply? That when it's truma, that's tameh, you're not allowed to eat. And therefore, it's a alav haba mechlal aseh, and therefore, there are no malkos. We had said earlier in the day, when we started our sugya, we asked at the opening of the Gemara, the question was phrased to Rav Sheshes about an orel, about meiser. And we said, ton of a shiur, that the Brisa really had omitted the case of orel, and that we should therefore assume that an orel is allowed to eat meiser. And here the Gemara adds in a little bit more to that. 2 lines from the bottom. From the resh of the Brisa, we also have things that have been omitted. What was missing? Top of Ayin Daled Amud Aleph, excuse me. The Nohagin, says the Gemara, that we have a custom bishar shnei shavua ve'ein lahem pidyon masha'ein kain b'meiser shma mino. What is this talking about? Take a look at Rashi. Says the Gemara, "V'noagin truma ubikurim bishar shnei shavua." In the remaining years of the 7-year shemitah cycle, b'chol shnos hashmita, aval meiser sheni ein noheg bebeis ubevav. So there we don't have it during the 2nd and 7th year. Now that din is a din that we all know, but it's not listed in the Brisa. And so the Gemara is just providing yet another example of how our Mishnah was ton of a shiur, and therefore falling back on that assumption, we therefore would assume that an orel is allowed to eat meiser. Toshma. Let's say that the mole doesn't do a very good job, and he leaves over adhesions, small strands of the inner lining of the skin, called the mucosa lining. The first step in bris milah, and the one that requires possibly more chachma than the other steps, is the step that we refer to as hafrada, of separating the orla from the atara itself. And for that, we insert a probe, if this is the anatomy, in between. I don't have a pen on me. Yes, I do. You would take a probe, let's say, and in between the foreskin and the crown, and you'd go down to where the skin meets the body and break those adhesions. And if the mohel doesn't do a good job with breaking those adhesions, or if the adhesions are quite complicated, which can happen, so then you'll have remnants of that little kind of skin still on the crown after the circumcision. So usually we just press them down, but if it's very significant, then you potentially would have to remove them. That's what we would refer to as tzitzna ma'akvena samila. So says the Gemara, if there were tzitzna ma'akvena samila, you have no access to truma pesach kachim and meiser because you're an arel. Remember that the mitzvah of bris milah is le'ikuva. So if you don't have the appropriate amount of skin removed, you're done for. That doesn't count at all. And you need to go get checked out. You need to make sure that you have a kosher bris. So says the Gemara, in this list where we said that a person is still an arel, when it refers to meiser, my lav meiser dagan, isn't this referring to meiser dagan, which is code word for meiser sheni? Says the Gemara, no, lo meiser behema. Says the Gemara, Meiser Behema, that's not possible. Meiser Behema Hainu Kachim. Meiser Behema is part of Kachim. So if Meiser Behema is part of Kachim, that means that this is duplicative. We have Kachim and we have Meiser. And if Meiser is talking about Meiser Behema, then why say both? Says the Gemara, that's not a very good argument because there's something else going on in this brisa that also doubles with the Tamech. Milo Tnan Pesach B'Katani Kachim. It's Kachim Kalim. We know that the Korban Pesach is Kachim Kalim. So we have another thing that's doubled. It says, no, that's not true. Where if Ayin Dalet and Aleph 6 lines down, Bishlama Pesach v'Kachim Tzriche. This brisa, which teaches us that if a person has tzitzin ma'akvena samila, that he cannot have access to these 4 areas of food, we need Pesach and Kachim to be separated. Why? Because the Itana Pesach, if we only had Pesach in this brisa and not brisa, that's mishum de arelus bepesach ksiva. Kachim eim alone. I might have thought that an arel, because he has tzitzin ma'akvena samila, I might have thought that he is allowed to eat kachim. Therefore, I had to list kachim because Pesach is super unique. The itana kachim, if I only had kachim, hava amina my kachim Pesach, I still might have only thought it was the korban Pesach, but not regular kachim, because we know that there's a din of arel by Pesach. Ella, so really the question falls back. You can't ask me your question about Pesach and Kachim. We know why we need both of those. Ella, back to our question, how can you say that Meiser Behema, Lamali? Why would you say that the Meiser listed in this brisa of Tzitzna Ma'akvena Samila is Meiser Behema? Hooray, we have Kachim already, and Kachim is a very sweeping category that includes Meiser Behema. So it says the Gemara, you're right. Ella, Meiser Rishon. Really what we're talking about is Meiser Rishon, and that is not part of Kachim. It's Meiser Rishon. And Rav Meir Hida Amar Meiser Rishon Asur Lizarim. So this brisa, which at the top of the page, which speaks about Tzitzna Ma'akvena Samila, and it speaks about Meiser and Kachim, the Meiser that we're referring to is Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that Meiser Rishon is Asur for non-Kohanim. So we still don't have a good, clear answer about Nishtar Bo Tzitzna Ma'akvena Samila. We have to learn a little bit more. Tashma. B'detani Reb Chia bar Rav Difti Arel Asur b'Shtei Maisros. We know that Reb Chia bar Rav said, Difti said that an Arel is Asur and forbidden in access to 2 types of Meiser. Ma'ila v'echad Meiser Dagan v'echad Meiser Behema. Wouldn't it then mean that this Arel is excluded from accessing Meiser Dagan v'echad Meiser Behema? In which case we need to re-understand the brisa above. What did it mean Meiser? We said it was Meiser Rishon. Says the Gemara, this is also Meiser Rishon. Hachanami, we could still explain that what we're talking about is Meiser Rishon v'Reb Meir. Okay, so we just got out of the problem. Tashma, let's try again. Onein aser b'Meiser u'moter b'Truma u'bepara. An onein is not allowed to eat Meiser, but he is allowed to eat Truma, and he is allowed to take to have access to the para. Tvul Yom, a person who has gone to the mikvah but is waiting for nightfall, Asr b'Truma mutter b'Para v'Meiser. He is not allowed to eat Truma, but he is allowed to have access to the Para Aduma and Meiser. Mechusar Kippurim Asr b'Para u'mutter b'Trumas Meiser. Mechusar Kippurim, someone who's not yet done with their, it's the Zav, Zava, Yoletis, and Mitzora, that these people, they're Asr b'Para. They have no access to the Chatas, to the Mechatas, so mutter b'Truma b'Meiser. If you want to say that an Arel is mutter b'Meiser, Nisni, it should say Arel Aser B'Truma Mutter B'Paro V'Maiser. Why doesn't it say that explicitly? Why was it left out? If you want to teach us that din that an Arel is Mutter B'Maiser, like we were talking about at the top of the page, so if you want to say that, then you need to have this brisa be more detailed. Says the Gemara, you're right, it would be that case, but we don't hold like that because Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold like that. Hi, Tana debate Rabbi Akiva he the Marbi Leila Arel Ketame the Tanya Rabbi Akiva Omer Ishish the Rabbi says, oh, we've seen this a couple of times. So therefore, this brisa is not like the is not possible to have the lenient opinion that an Arel is Mutter B'Maiser because this brisa is like Rabbi Akiva. Asks the Gemara, Man Tana de Pali Rabbi Akiva. Who is the dissenting opinion against Rabbi Akiva, the one that we've been trying to find? Says the Gemara, Tana, it is one of the authors in the Brisa, the Rabbi Yossi Hababli. In fact, it's the sheet of the Tanakama. Titania, Sreifas onin u'mechusar kippurim kshera. If an onin does the Sreifa, or mechusar kippurim doesn't, so then kshera, the halacha is that it's still kosher. Rabbi Yossi Hababli Omer onin kshera, mechusar kippurim psula. So it's not very clear from the Gemara, but Rashi highlights this about the mechusar kippurim. Take a look at Rashi, almost halfway down. Tana Yosef Hababli, Tanakama. The author of the first opinion in the Brisa, the Yosef Habablihi, Damar Mechusar Kippurim Kasher B'Para, and Rashi goes on to say that this Mechusar Kippurim includes an Arel. So that's how we understand this Shita. So let's go back in the Gemara. And the Gemara says, and this is one last sugya for the night. It's all part of the same sugya. Rav Yitzchak Savar, we're exactly halfway down on Dal Amud Aleph. Even Rav Yitzchak is of the opinion Savar Arel Aser B'Maiser. Damar Rav Yitzchak Minay Arel Aser B'Maiser. How do we know that an Arel is excluded from having access to Maiser? Ne'emar mimenu b'Maiser, v'ne'emar mimenu b'Pesach. We have Gzeira Shava. We have the word mimenu by Maiser, and we have the word mimenu by Pesach. Actually, we have the word mimenu 3 times by each, as we'll soon see. But it's eligible for Gzeira Shava. Ma mimenu ha'amar b'Pesach Arel Aser Bo. We have the word mimenu, and we know that an Arel is excluded from the Korban Pesach. Af mimenu ha'amar b'Maiser Arel Aser Bo. So too, when we have the word mimenu by Maiser, it also teaches us that an Arel is excluded from having access to Maiser. And Mufni, we know that this is a higher level Gzeira Shava. We've spoken about this many times, and I think on Shabbos or a couple of days ago, not that long ago, maybe just 2 days ago, don't remember. Do you know? I don't know. Okay, just please, that we know we have no clue. The lower level of Gzeira Shava is when there are 2 words that in area 1 and area 2, but the words are also used for other drashas. So it's like a low quality drasha. And how do we know that the Gzeira Shava is so low quality? Because if it's only a basic Gzeira Shava, then any kasha to distinguish one sugya from the other will ruin the whole Gzeira Shava. But if in fact you have a Gzeira Shava that's mufne, where the words on both sides are available, completely available, then even if you can find a difference between case 1 and case 2, you cannot knock down a Gzeira Shava mufne. So the Gemara says this has to be a Gzeira Shava mufne. This mimenu, to teach us that an Arel is not allowed to have meiser, it has to be mufne, di lo mufne. If you wouldn't have said that, then ikal nifrach, I could easily find differences between the world of Pesach and meiser. I could come up with 100 differences between Pesach and Meiser. So therefore, it must be that this Gzeira Shava is mufne. Says the Gemara, Lai, you are correct. Afnuye mufne. So then the Gemara says that in fact this is the higher level Gzeira Shava, and the words are available in full for a Gzeira Shava, which cannot be rejected. So asks the Gemara 2/3 of the way down, 2 lines before the wide lines, my mufni, what words are available? Amar Rava, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Tlasa mimenu ksivi b'Pesach. The word mimenu is written 3 times by Pesach. If you look in the side here, it says Al tochu mimenu nova shel muvushal b'mayim, and then it says V'lo sasir mimenu ad boker, v'hanusar mimenu ad boker. 3 mimenus. So says the Gemara, last short line. What are the 3 mimenus? Chad legufe. 1 is for the basic pshat of the pasuk. V'chad legzeira shava. 1 is accessible mufne for the Gzeira Shava. V'chad leman de'amar haba hakasav litein lach aseh achar lo saseh. And the third one is to teach us that we have an aseh after the lo saseh. What is that coming to teach us? What does that mean? So it says Rashi 2/3 of the way down. First it says Boish Tisrofu, and that's the lav. And then it says, that's the essay. Litain asay acharlos asay lomar she'ein lo kinalo. It's a lav hanita klasay. So the Gemara says that third word mimenu in Pesach comes to teach us that it's a lav hanita klasay. Anyways, the Gemara says, "I did ksiv nosar ksiv mimenu ksiv nami mimenu," because because we're talking about nosar, it also has the word mimenu, and that word mimenu is mufne, and therefore all is well and good. So according to the ones who say that we need this word for teaching us about a second morning in order to do the sreifa by nosar, the word mimenu is still going to be extra. There's plenty of ways to explain it. Still going to be mufna. So says the Gemara, that's all well and good, but what about the other side of the Gzeira Shava? We did find an available word mimenu on the side of Pesach. What about on the side of Meiser? So says the Gemara, 3 lines into the wide lines, the word mimenu is written 3 times by Meiser. Those are the 3 references all in one pasuk. How do we understand them? One for the pashtus of the pasuk, one for Shita Rabbi Rav Yochanan in regards to truma that became tummy that it can be burned. What does Reish Lakish say? How do we know that if Meiser Sheni became tummy, you can still anoint yourself with it? It cannot be given to a dead person. I'm able to give it to a person who's like dead. And what's common to both? Anointing is something that can be done on alive people and can be done on dead people. And that's why the Gemara says that if there would, this is the third word, mimenu, that if there were to be a Meiser Sheni oil that became tameh, we can use it as anointing oil. Says the Gemara, why did you learn the pasuk that way that it's talking about oil? There's something else that applies to live people and dead people. What about buying a pine box? And what about the tachrichin? Amar Rav Huna Bered Rav Yeshua mimenu. It has to be attached to his body, migufo, not something external to the body. And the anointing oil goes on the body. Rav Ashi Amar, when it says lo nasati, no, it's dumya de lo achalti. The not lo nasati mimenu lemeis has to be similar to the lo achalti. Ma lahalan migufo avkan migufo. A similar answer is that it has to apply to the body. That's how we know we're not talking about tachrichin, but rather we're talking about sicha. So then the Gemara highlights the concern. Ve'akati, it's very nice that you have the mufna on one side of Pesach. The word mimenu on one side allows for the Gzeira Shava to be very strong on the side of Pesach. That's great. But ve'akati mufna mitzad echadhu. It's only mufna on one side and not on both sides. We don't have an extra word on the Meiser side. All the drushes were taken, as we just saw. So says the Gemara, it would be all fine and good to leave the Gzeira Shava as is, being mufna on one side. That if you have Gzeira Shava mufna on one side, mitzad echad, that you are allowed to learn and you're not allowed to ask questions on it. That's fine. But not everybody holds that way. Some people hold that that's still a weak Gzeira Shava. But according to the ones who say that when you have a Gzeira Shava mufna mitzad echad, that you can still ask the Bam Kasha, which in this case is the differences between Pesach and Meiser. That by Pesach we have Pigul Nosar and Tameh. So then, how then would we understand it? Says the Gemara, don't worry. We can move around one of the drashas. The drasha that was used, Rabbi Abahu, the drasha from Rabbi Abahu that we had learned a little earlier about burning tameh oil. Really, we can learn that from somewhere else to free up the word mimenu. Oh, here you go. Rabbi Abahu. That line of Rabbi Abahu about burning the oil is really midrav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravua Nafka. The Amar Rav Nachman Bar Rabba Baravua. My dechsivani vani hine nasati lachas mishmeres chumasi. B'shtei chumas kasim medaber. Achas chuma tahora v'achas chuma tmeya. Amar Rachmana shelo teila saka tachas tavshilcha. That you're not allowed to burn it underneath, but you are allowed to burn the oil in one way or another. And what that does is it frees up the word mimenu on both sides. Now we have the word mimenu by Pesach. We have the word mimenu by Meiser, and therefore we learn the halacha from one to the other. We'll stop right here. Mitzvah Hashem, pick up on Shabbos, 2 lines from the bottom of 9 Daled and Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.